right, let's get going, huh? Let's go, gather up. Come on now. All right, fellas, you gotta remember your body is like day-old rice. If it ain't warmed up properly, something real bad can happen, yeah?
Athletes, take your mark. Get set. It's time for the Addict to Athlete podcast. Everybody out there, Coach Blu Robinson here. I want to thank you all so much for downloading, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast. We greatly appreciate you doing so. As always, jump onto that website, addicttoathlete.org. You'll find all of our backlog podcast information about the program, and be able to jump on and see how to create your own chapter of Addict to Athlete with our recovery coach program. So jump on addicttoathlete.org and see what you can discover there by becoming part of the team. Athletes, we got some neat things on the horizon. Right now, Addict to Athlete is fundraising for our holiday season for our Project ELF experience. This is where Addict to Athlete helps families in the community who are struggling with issues pertaining to treatment and issues with addiction, raise money to help them subsidize some of their Christmas needs. So if you are interested in donating, jump on to our socials, Facebook, Instagram, those kind of things, or the addicttoathlete.org website, and connect and see how you can help. It's a great way to give back to the community that was once taken from. So enjoy the feeling of helping individuals who are truly in need. Athletes, got a great guest in the platform today. I'm excited to talk with Stewart because we bumped into him as he was making some life changes and settled in the bustling city of Vernal, Utah, only to prepare himself for the bustling city of Las Vegas as he started some new endeavors. But Stewart, welcome to the Addict to Athlete podcast, brother. Will you just jump in, introduce yourself, give us a little bit of background about you, and let's talk about all things recovery and recreation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Blu. Wonderful to be on the podcast. Thanks for having me. So I guess I'll start off by saying I'm a person in recovery from substance use disorder. My sobriety date is April 4th of 2022, which I guess puts me at about 2 years, 6 months, and 14 days sober, but who's counting? And just a little bit of my background and then a little bit of the origin of my addiction, and we can kind of go from there. I have no real reason to be so dissatisfied with my life as I used to be. I grew up in a great family, grew up near Portland, Oregon, to a very supportive family, great folks. They're still married to this day. They were very supportive. We never wanted for anything. And I'm the oldest of 6 of us kids. And outside of the normal everyday family stuff, I was pretty lucky to grow up in the family that I did, in the community that I did. So I had no real reason to be so dissatisfied with my life. But from as long as I can remember, I was always full of fear, full of anxiety, full of insecurity and low self-esteem. So I kind of went through, from as long as I can remember, that was sort of my default feeling about myself. And I started to find these different solutions along the way to make myself feel better. And as a younger person, food was a big source of well-being for me. If I eat, I would feel good. The more I would eat, the more I would feel good, with some side effects of consequences of not feeling so good. Porn came into the picture as a younger person, and I'd look at that, I'd feel good. But of course, it had its side effects. And also just being a recluse, running away, staying away, withdrawing was another technique. And then around the high school years, probably around 16 years old, I found alcohol. And from the very first drink, I really felt like I had arrived. All of these feelings of fear, anxiety, insecurity, low self-esteem were now gone. I used to try to mask those things by putting on a good show and trying to play the part of someone who had it together. But it was always a part that I was playing. Now with alcohol, it no longer felt like a part I was playing. I got that in my body, and it felt so good. I felt so good about life, so handsome, so funny. And that person I call Two Brew Stew, and he's probably still the best person around. When I get 1 or 2 drinks in me, maybe even to this day, though I've been away from it for a while, I probably still am the best version of myself, because I just feel on top of the world and that I'm everything I wanted to be. However, 2 brew stew doesn't stay around very long, and 22 brew stew is not far behind. And he's a real piece of work. And so I could just never stop once I got started. So that is a brief intro to kind of my background and then the problem that I created for myself with kind of addictive behaviors.
Yeah, Stuart, I think a lot of people think that in order to, I guess, properly represent an addiction, you have to have experienced some heavy trauma or some abuse or something. And that's not always the case. Like you said, there were feelings of fear and anxiety and just kind of that out of sorts kind of thing. And that can be just as detrimental as an abuse cycle. And so when did you start realizing, like, man, why am I always so anxious? Why do I always kind of feel like something's going to happen or something unexpected is going to befall upon me? How old were you when you started kind of realizing, like, I don't know if this is normal? Because I don't think a lot of kids, preteens or whatnot, can articulate what that is. They kind of think, well, this is just life, I guess, right? So when did you start becoming aware of, like, maybe this isn't normal?
Yeah, you could probably put me in the bucket of people who just thought that maybe this was normal. That was just kind of my default setting, always feeling out of place, always feeling insecure, always feeling uncomfortable in my own skin. So I don't think it was until later on that I was really aware of it. And to this day, I've never really got to the bottom of why it was. And I don't know that that's important or not, what it may have been or why it was that way. Maybe that's just how I was wired. But the other thing that came along with that in always having tools to use to escape, I never faced up to a problem once in my life. I always ran away. So I think during that developmental period, since I was always running away, I wasn't building this resilience and life experience and some of that grit and the skills that I needed to deal with life on its own terms. I always just had something that I could run to. So looking back at it now as an adult, even now I'm learning to live life on its own terms. And I'm getting a late start on that because it was just years and years and years of running away and never really truly growing up and learning to address problems on my own.
That is such an important principle, listeners, for you all to kind of take heed to, because it's the nature versus nurture question. Like, where does that stuff really learned? Is it learned by example through parenting and environment, or is it, like cultivated through experience and whatnot? And so, most adolescents that I see, like even young kids, 5, 10, 11, 12, I've noticed that there's these situational things that happen where they just seem a little bit anxious and whatnot. And then you got the hovering parent, or the completely like oblivious parent. And they, again, even parents are kind of like, well, that's just my kid. He's a shy kid or whatnot. And they don't really understand how important it is to spend time and invest, because they don't know, they don't recognize it. And so you can't really blame parents for this because they think, well, this is just my kid. And maybe they were like that, which means it could be hereditary. So there's so many avenues to this, brother. And I think that it's kind of a neat thing that, like, through just existence and the grit that it takes in recovery, that you've learned to live life on life terms, that you've learned to just show up no matter what problems come. Because that's where I think the link between health and recreation, movement equaling healing, my erase and replace philosophy comes into play, because it's like, if I'm going to erase this feeling of anxiety, then I'm going to replace it with me acting upon things instead of things happening to me. Tell me about the bridge, because if you were using food as a coping mechanism and substances, you had a lot of different avenues. That means you had to make some pretty like big changes. The April 2022, why that specifically, and what did the snowball start to collect?
Yeah, so it just kind of built and built and built over the years. And, every now and then I'd have maybe some moments of determination that, okay, I've got to give this up. But it was just too good of a tool to let go of. It could just help me run away from my problems, albeit temporarily. It was better to be running away temporarily, I thought, than just always constantly being in a state of discontent. So as I kind of went through my adult life, I had some I had some level of success. My life hadn't fallen apart. I was able to keep good jobs, and but behind the scenes, I was a complete wreck. I was continuing to withdraw. I was very reclusive. I never let anyone know about my problem. I wanted to be my little secret. For one, I wanted to keep that facade that I had of kind of having things together in my life. I kind of felt like as the oldest brother, I needed to have things in line as a coworker. I needed to, have things together, or at least pretend to have things together. So I continued to play this part on the surface, and I'd present myself as somebody who, although quirky, because maybe I'd try a geographic cure here or there, or exhibit some behaviors that were a little off the wall, and maybe get into a little bit of trouble with the law, for instance, like a DUI, as I just kind of played it off as a one-off and a silly mistake. Little did they know that I made a habit of being drunk basically all the time. So it came to the point where it was just becoming unmanageable. Work was suffering. It had suffered for a long time. Relationships were suffering, and it just got to a real point of despair. At the time, I've since done a career change, but at the time I was working for the National Park Service. I was there in Yosemite National Park, where I had been for a while, and there I was in one of the most beautiful places in the world. And instead of doing the things that I used to love to do, like hiking and biking and running and exploring, I was getting off work, shutting the blinds, and trying to drink myself silly until I could get through the evening, reclused away there in my apartment, go to bed, and do it all over again. Every day a worse hangover. Every day a little bit of determination there that I'm going to stop. But by about midday, I thought, you know what? I know it's going to make me feel better. And the cycle would just continue and continue. But it just got to that point where I was so miserable. Something had to give. I was having some thoughts of maybe even taking my own life, because this was just not a way that I felt like I could live anymore. And I certainly couldn't stop on my own either. So I had this conundrum. I didn't feel like I had a way out. Fortunately, I decided that I was going to reach out for help, started making some calls, and decided that I was going to check myself into a inpatient rehab facility. I mentioned this all kind of being a secret. After I decided that I was going to take that step and check myself into rehab, I told coworkers, I told some other people, and then it was time to call my family. I had kept this entire debacle of my life a secret from them. And it was actually on April 1st of 2022, so April Fool's Day, that I called my folks and then all my siblings one by one to say, hey, by the way, for the last 20 some years, I've been drinking myself silly in secret, and I've got to stop. And I'm in a desperate situation, so I'm going to check myself into a rehab. This came as almost a complete shock to all of them. That's how good of a secret keeper I was. Very good at being deceitful and keeping myself private and secrets. So that was kind of a little interesting wrinkle, especially for them to think, hey, he's kind of got things together, and then all of a sudden getting this call saying, hey, my life's a disaster and I'm thinking about ending it, and I need to check myself into a rehab. So bless their hearts, and man, feel bad for them when that initial shock of this. But on that same hand, like I said, I've got such a great family that their only concern was for me, and they were so supportive of it. Go do what you need to do, and have supported me along the way ever since. So that's kind of where it started to turn around, was checking myself into that rehab, and then I continued on formal treatment for actually quite a while after that.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And here's the hard part, right? The hard part is that there'll be people out there to be like, come on, your parents, nobody knew. Come on. Like that means that they were checked out and stuff. But no, that means that you wore a very a very unique mask. Does that make sense? And I think that this stuff can go under the radar for quite a while. In fact, there's this funny little thing I've noticed, even with kids and youth and some adults, is that on average, when you're a kid, it takes about 2 years of use before a parent notices. And that sounds kind of weird, right? Because it doesn't just happen all at once. As you know, life slowly becomes unmanageable. It's not like one day your life is just unmanageable. It's like you start getting bad grades and you can kind of like say, oh, it's the teacher's this, or I don't understand that. And, then you start changing friend groups and you're like, well, that guy's kind of a dumb. And parents are asking these questions, but they're not really investing. And so life doesn't become unmanageable overnight. But it sounds like you were so emotionally isolated too, because I'm sure you didn't want to cause any waves or make anyone nervous, that you did. You probably made very strong efforts to hide. And brother, I can only imagine it's like a magician, telling the audience how he does his tricks, right? You're like, by the way, and I'm curious about the guilt that I'm sure some of them probably felt, like, why didn't we notice? And, trying to release them from that feeling of like, hey, I was a really good, suppressor of these emotions, versus their feeling of like, why didn't we notice? I mean, you opened up a can of worms at the same time, a probably very loving heart with the family, which makes that drive so much, I think, more challenging, that you were at a point where you were willing to let them in. Like, that epiphany, brother, could not have come easy to you, I would imagine. It wasn't a light decision.
Yeah. And there's been lots of conversation since, lots of, and I think after the fact, there was maybe some things that they saw that I kind of played off as one-offs, like the DUI, which I should have had thousands of them, but just got caught that one time, and thank goodness I never hurt anybody. But I was also the king of geographic cures. So I was moving around, changing jobs, changing locations. So if you just stay on the move, it's hard to get you hard for people to get me in their sights and see what's going on. So geographic cures was a big thing for me. And then, there was different, and my family doesn't drink either. So that was another thing. So there wasn't opportunities really to drink around them, although you just stash it out. I got to go out to my car real quick. I got to do this. You just come up with these different techniques. But the prime technique was just not doing it around them and making sure that I had plenty of my own space to be able to do my thing. So, but since then, like I said, there's been a lot of conversations. There's been a lot. Oh, you mean when you moved here, or when you quit that job, or when you did that? I was like, oh yeah. I was in a super bad spot then, and thought maybe sometimes I actually believed it. I thought if I go to a different place or do a different thing, that unfortunately everywhere I went, like they say, there I was. So I never addressed the problem, which was.
So crossing that threshold from addiction into recovery, I think is amazing. And like you just said, running away from the problem didn't work. And sometimes people think, when they get a hold of me, they're like, oh, you're just cross addicting these people from using to working out. I'm like, I'd much rather have them overdose on a marathon in training than heroin and die. So, there's no argument there. But tell me about the leap you took between running away from the addiction to physically running towards a solution, because we bumped into each other because you've kind of adopted that same philosophy about movement equaling healing. Like, tell me a little bit about your journey as utilizing health and recreation and movement as a part of recovery. Like, what interests you? Because most people don't find this on their own. And when they do, they're kind of like, why doesn't everybody do this? So tell me a little bit about your journey about literally erasing and replacing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned the inpatient recovery center I went to. I was originally going to go for the 30 days and realized, okay, that's not enough, because after 30 days, I was happy with my break and ready to get back at it. Maybe one last hurrah. And that was a real big changing moment for me, because I thought, okay, this isn't just a break. I'm not going to be a moderate drinker. I need to give this up. So I ended up sticking around that rehab for 30 more days, then decided to continue treatment in an outpatient program in a sober living down in San Diego, where I stayed for a little over a year. And I found a group down there, the group that I work for now, the nonprofit that I work for now down there, that I got really active in. They've got a similar philosophy to Addict to Athlete, that movement, connection, and community is really the key.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was out doing all kinds of.
And they were first out of the gate with this stuff.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the Phoenix is
like
the group that
they've got a good history.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
if you don't mind, I would love to promote it, because the
Sure.
Phoenix, they kind of spearheaded all of this stuff, and I think that they were instrumental in bringing a lot of other groups around, because they saw something that, again, that the norm didn't. And so you actually got involved with them in San Diego?
Yeah, down in San Diego was the first event that I went to. It was a pickleball event. And the Phoenix, just in a way of introduction, is a nationwide sober active community putting on free events for folks in recovery and their supporters and their allies and just the community in general. You don't have to be in recovery to participate. The only thing we ask is that you're 48 hours substance use free leading up to the event. So very low barrier to entry. I mean, I remember 48 hours seems like an eternity, but it's doable. So the only price of admission is 48 hours sober. So I got down to San Diego, downloaded the Phoenix app where you can kind of find out about the different activities. I showed up to a pickleball event. All the activities are led by volunteers, and I just felt right at home. I realized, okay, this pickleball is great. This event that I'm at is great. But I caught the vision immediately. I was like, the bigger picture here is these people that I'm doing it with. They understand where I'm coming from. They're on a similar journey. They're also wanting to get active, get connected, and build community. So I was hooked right off the bat. And then I started going to all sorts of other events like climbing and hiking and kayaking and all kinds of different things. And that's what really inspired me to start to get active again. I became a volunteer for the Phoenix and started hosting some different events along with other volunteers down there in the community. And then I then had the bright idea that I'd love to do something exciting to celebrate. In this case, it was a year of recovery. I thought I want to do something really big to celebrate this new journey. And so then I decided I was going to go hike the Pacific Crest Trail as a fundraiser and awareness campaign to raise awareness of the Phoenix and substance use disorder and sobriety in general. And so that kicked off that post formal treatment. That was kind of the next step in my journey, was to do this great big adventure that I could use to celebrate a new and better life in recovery.
Tell me about that. I mean, what gravitated you towards the Pacific Coast Trail? Because that's no easy feat. I mean, you've got to be prepared, and there's some interesting like levels of intensity through that thing. And so what interests you in that? Because not a lot of people do it. It's been done, but not a lot of people do it because of the investment. But I look at you investing in your recovery, like you said, staying longer than you needed, because you're like, I want to go the full distance. Committing to these life changes. Like, you're no stranger to commitments. So tell me about why the Pacific Coast Trail was so, I guess, like in the crosshairs of wanting to tackle this. What interests you about this?
Yeah. And so for those who aren't familiar with it, the Pacific Crest Trail is a 2,650 mile trail. It goes from the Canadian border to the Mexican border, follows the mountain ranges down through the states of Washington, Oregon, and California. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, not far from the trail, not far from the PCT, and I had hiked it as a Boy Scout, some 50 milers and some other things like that. And then as an adult, I had kind of gotten into backpacking and hiking, lots of hiking. And like I mentioned, I worked for the national parks and was always doing a lot of hiking and adventuring and backpacking. And that was one of the things that I had really let go. Like I said, I was no longer doing any of that kind of stuff. I was just drinking myself silly and decided I really wanted to get back into doing something big, get back into backpacking. And I decided I'd just go all in and do the Pacific Crest Trail. So that's how it began. That's how I got the idea. So I started to train, got my ultralight gear stocked up, must have watched a million YouTube videos about the trail and tips and tricks and how to pack and what food to eat and all this kind of stuff. And I did the trail southbound. So I started up at the Canadian border the border of Canada and Washington State, started making my way south, and finished at the Mexico border. So it's about a 4.5 month journey, and it was a great mix of time out there solo to think and reflect, and then also quite a social experience, which I didn't originally expect, because I met lots of people along the way and built great community, and it added an extra dose of inspiration and purpose to it, because I was doing it as an awareness campaign and fundraiser for the Phoenix. So that's how it began.
Well, for someone that struggled with fear and anxiety and all this kind of stuff, I can't imagine you being like, all right, let's go. Because although the substance abuse had kind of ceased to exist there, they were still prone to those feelings and stuff. So I'm curious, like the emotional toll, because there's a physical thing and you can do that. You know, you've proven that to yourself. And your love for the outdoors. I think there's a huge connection there. You must feel very connected to that higher power, you know, surrounded by the aspens and the pines and the rocks and stuff. I mean, that's, you know, I think God's on every mountaintop. So I'm curious about, like, how did you overcome some of the anxiety? Because it's always there. How'd you shut it up to take that first step that led you all the way down to the border?
Really, the biggest key is that I didn't shut it up. I just learned to sit with it, or I guess walk with it, hike with it. In those moments where I was uncomfortable, I realized one of the most important lessons I came away with is it's okay to be comfortable. And I was forced to be in uncomfortable situations, whether it's typically doing 25 to 30 miles a day, sometimes up to 35. And the heat and the exhaustion and the elements and just the challenge and the terrain. But when I started the trip, the first thing I did was just resolve that if I was ever feeling super tempted and I was fearful of relapse or felt like that was going to be a possibility, that I would just call it a day and come back another time. So I went into it prepared to get out of there if I needed to. Because when you come across the resupply towns, you know, it's very much a community. It's a celebration. You know, lots of people hitting the bars when you get your days off and things like that. So I decided, you know what, if I feel like I'm putting my sobriety at risk, I'm just going to call it, and I'm going to be just fine with it. But then I realized as I was going that it was just such an epic experience. On a daily basis, I felt in awe by the experience, by the wilderness, by the landscapes, which really gave me a sense of gratitude. And then I felt small in a good way. I felt humble in a good way, and realized that my little problems are really not that big a deal when you're out in this big, vast wilderness and having this experience. You know, my problems really aren't that big. And like I said before, I was remaining in the moment. I wasn't spending time regretting the past or future tripping too much on the future. I learned to be in the moment, and in those uncomfortable times, whether it was emotional discomfort, or physical discomfort, I was okay. I've got some tools to use. I can just continue to go. There's nothing wrong with taking a break. There's nothing wrong with taking some time to heal. There's nothing wrong with reaching out for help if you need it. All these different parallels to recovery that came into play on this journey. And it was a really neat experience of self-discovery and learning.
It blows my mind. You mentioned something that kind of stuck out with me. And it was kind of like based off of this understanding of, like, you made a choice to be uncomfortable. But that's kind of like the choice that we make to use, because although there'll be some good periods while we're using, we're ultimately choosing to be uncomfortable. So it's like, well, then what do I want to have as a result of, right? I mean, choosing to be uncomfortable while hiking and you know, cruising the trail for 4 months, that's insane. But so is continuing to use when you know the outcome, right? And so you being able to have that power of choice reestablished, how important was that? And is that still for you? Because you said, you even said it, like, I gave myself the authority to choose out if I needed to. We don't really think about the power of choice as much as we probably should, because we make so many of them every day. Sometimes we don't realize that the magnitude of them. How did that resonate with you? Like just that choice to be uncomfortable, but this time for something to gain instead of something to lose.
Yeah, exactly. So I just, utilize those lessons now that I'm back in the real world as it relates to, just life in general, all those different tools, and realizing that, I do have a choice. If I'm sitting here feeling bad about myself, sitting here feeling a little depressed or fearful, I can, sometimes it might just be, like I said, just being in the moment, sitting through it, feeling it, understanding, okay, where are these feelings coming from, and being okay with it. And then there's sometimes I got to get the heck out. I got to get out and go move, go for a run, go for a bike ride, go call somebody up, let somebody know how I'm feeling, reach out to somebody else. And there's multiple tools, mindfulness, meditation. I can go to a meeting. I'm kind of an all paths to recovery. I'm not zeroed in on one single path or meeting or 12-step, though I've been involved with several of them. I came up in AA, but I also enjoy the Erase and Replace the program that Addict Athlete has, a Smart Recovery, Recovery Dharma, Refuge Recovery. There's all these different programs, and I'm an all paths guy, which I think is really to my advantage, because that just increases my available tools that I have in my bag.
And you mentioned too that the trail, like 4 months, that means in all aspects of the word, life was put on hold in a lot of other areas. And some people are like, well, great for him, but I couldn't do 4 months. Yeah, you could, but you've also got to be willing to let go of some stuff, right? Like, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, most people would think, well, if they did that, that means they'd have to completely check out and do some stuff. But you know what? For you, it was necessary. You decided to live in what most might perceive as scarcity, not realizing that you were living in abundance. Does that make sense? And the difference between that is like, well, it's great for Stewart. There's no way I could do that. Yeah, it is. There are ways to do these things, but you've got to be, again, willing to choose the uncomfortable. And you've got to look at the small amount of stuff that you do have as enough for your needs, right? And so tell me a little bit about that. You willing to kind of give up for your own like mental health recovery, a job, a home, a roof over your head, and get rid of, like, to a certain degree, the abundance of life for what most would perceive as scarcity. But in actuality, you were creating abundance. So tell me a little bit about that, because it wasn't an easy decision, I'm sure, but like for you, it was necessary, right?
Yeah. But it was a little easier than maybe it would seem. I had stepped away from my job to focus on the recovery program down there in San Diego. So I did have some career decisions to make, but I didn't really need to make those until after I got done with the trail. And so I was really fortunate. This is another thing I just feel so grateful about, is that I had the means and the time available to do something like that. Just feel so blessed to be able to have the ability to do something like that. And then, as I was out there, it makes you realize what you really don't need a lot. And you really don't need a lot to be happy. And some of the happiest times out there were the most challenging. Some of those days where you're just putting on serious elevation gain. But at the top of that elevation gain is some of the most epic views I have ever had in my life. My heart is in the mountains, and I went through some of the most beautiful mountains in the North Cascades and the Sierra Nevada and some of the desert mountain ranges and every Cascade range and everything in between. So I just realized that I don't need much, and some of the best rewards come after some of the hardest times. So anyway, that's I guess that's my take on that.
Was there ever a time where you seriously considered like being done, like not just because of like temptations or whatnot, but just because of even mental fatigue, where you're like, you know what, to heck with this, but yet again, another step forward got you there. what about those times when you were seriously contemplating throwing in the towel and what am I doing? And because all of us go through that self-doubt, like it or not, even if our goals are sound. How did you get through the really hard, sad, lonely days?
Yeah, that what the heck am I doing experience probably happened about once a day. When you're out there, there's always some part of the day where you're thinking, "What in the world am I even doing?" But then you get, sometimes you snap out of that with one of those views that's kind of a payoff. But a lot of times, I think of there's some parts in Oregon where a lot of times you're just walking through the trees, or you're not getting any views, or you're down in the desert and it's hotter than heck, and you're not getting a whole lot of views, which is my favorite thing, those landscapes. But you realize that the payoff will come, and the strength that you're gaining through through those hard times is a reward in itself. There was one point in the trail where I thought I was going to have to stop, not by choice, but because of an injury, and it was actually right out the gate. The area that you start in up in northern Washington to get to the Canadian border, you can't drive there, so you've got about a 30-mile hike north on the Pacific Crest Trail to tag the terminus, and then to backtrack that 30 miles is the beginning of the trail. I was so amped up, and I got there. My brother dropped me off at the trailhead to start that 30 miles north, and it was just some epic landscapes. Such a beautiful area up there by North Cascades National Park and that northern Cascade Range. I was so amped up, and I came out hot. I was in shape, but I wasn't in as good a shape as I needed, and this was some of the most arduous terrain of the whole trip. And so I was like, you know what? I'm getting to that border today. I'm just doing these 30 miles, and I'm going to start tomorrow. And I just came out hot. And even after that first day, I felt like in my knee, I was like, something's not quite right. But I kept going, and I kept up my quick pace. And about 3 or 4 days into it, I was like, oh no, I may have screwed things up, because my knee was really in rough shape. So I had my little Garmin InReach device, and I messaged my brother and say, hey, send me that alternate pair of shoes that I had, because I knew I needed a change of shoes. And then I decided that, okay, at the first stop in Stehekin, Washington, I'm just going to take a few days off to recover and hopefully get this knee better. And that ended up being exactly what I needed, and I was able to continue. But coming out from that point, I decided after Stehekin, heading south, I was going to ease into it. So again, some more recovery parallels. I reached out. I knew I had a lifeline there with my brother. I knew he could ship me something. Reached out for others to help. Slowed my roll. Sometimes I need to do that in recovery too. I need to, I'm all amped. Maybe I'm on a pink cloud. Maybe things are going well. Okay, well, maybe I need to go ahead and take care of myself, do some self-care, take some time to relax. And then coming out of Stehekin, heading south, I was like, okay, I learned a lesson there. I'm not quite ready to be knocking off 30 miles a day. Maybe I'll start with 20 miles a day and get myself built up. Okay, 23, 25, and so on. So I started not trying to bite off more than I could chew. And then next thing you know, I built up that strength to where now it became no big deal to hike that same amount. So the amount of miles that seemed, insurmountable and were causing me all kinds of troubles early in the trail were now just easy peasy lemon squeezy as we continued on.
Yeah, learning from those mistakes. Right? I mean, you're right. That's a very good analogy for recovery. I mean, it's a process of pacing. Like I've seen lots of people in treatment come in and like, I'm going to do this full force, and then boom, they hit that wall and they're like, this is real. And I think it really does make or break with your ability to like talk through the hard times and to come up with some solutions. I think we have everything we need inside us if we'll listen and problem solve instead of just, all or nothing thinking. So that to me is amazing. So every journey has a journey's ending. What was it like when you rolled up on the ending of it? Because that in and of itself is a little bit of a challenging thing, because there's post-race blues and things like that. But like, I'm sure you were ecstatic to be done, but also there's probably a little heartbreak there too. Did you experience something like that? Like, this is over now.
Yeah, it was very much mixed emotions as we came in, and I say we because I met some folks along the way. I started the journey solo, but starting about Central Oregon, I paired up with a guy. He and I were on the same pace, so we ended up finishing together. And then around Yosemite, our third partner joined us. So we all finished together. And then down in Southern California, someone else joined, and we all finished that together. So out there on those long trail through hikes, your trail family or tramily is a big deal. And that's what helped it be kind of a social and connecting experience, was to be able to join those folks, and they were really supportive of my journey. It turns out one of those people was a drug and alcohol counselor, so that was very, very convenient. So she was especially supportive. The other two were very much so as well. And so as we were coming into the final stretch, you do have those emotions. You have that sense of accomplishment that's right there at the tip of your fingers, but you also have you kind of get those trail blues that it's coming to an end. Such an epic experience is coming to an end. So there is this conflict. And we also kind of knew people were going to be asking us about what kind of epiphanies we had out there on the trail. So we talked about, okay, anybody got any epiphanies? And if not, we better start making them up, because people are going to want to ask us how our lives have changed now that we've got down here to the border, when 90% of the time you're not thinking about epiphanies. You're thinking about how your feet feel, or you're thinking about that view, or you're thinking about not coming across the trail the same time as that bear or mountain goat. And so we would kind of laugh about that, because at the end you're also, you are kind of reflective, but you're also pretty beaten down and ready to be done. So it was a mix of emotions. What made it especially sweet for me is because I had just come from San Diego, the trail ends just east of San Diego down there at the Mexican border. So those folks who I was involved with the Phoenix organization had a welcome home party and an ice cream party. A big group of them met us down there at the border, kind of had a celebration. So that was just an extra layer and an extra little something to be super excited about when I got there to the end. And then once you finish, and a week or two goes by, I would say with a couple of months, you're just kind of over it. You're like, okay, I'm so psyched that I did that. I can finally feel my feet again. But then, you do, as it goes on, you kind of get those, oh man, I miss it. Or you have that big letdown because I just did 4.5 months of the most epic experience, falling asleep under the stars every night, seeing some of the most beautiful country I've ever seen in my life. And now I'm just kind of here in my bed, living an everyday life. But I took those same kind of lessons that I had out there on the trail and just applied them towards my everyday life. And that's to live in gratitude, to realize that I really am super lucky just to be alive, and to be able to have so much of the blessings that I have in my life. I can still stay humble, even though I'm, not falling asleep under this just massive expanse of stars every night, and looking straight up at a huge cliff and a mountain. Again, I can stay humble and realize, again, my problems really are pretty small, and I can still stay in the moment in my everyday life. And one of the most important things is the danger zone for me is getting caught up in myself. I don't know if there's any more selfish person than me. My first 100 thoughts every morning are about me, and the next 200 are about what other people can do for me. And somewhere down the line comes maybe I could do some good in the world today. So I try to make a conscious effort to bring that, hey, maybe I could do some good, or maybe I can help somebody else out. Kind of bring that thought maybe a little earlier in the day, because there's no better way to get out of myself and get out of my problems than to help somebody else with theirs. And again, realize that, okay, what I'm dealing with isn't really too big, and to build community and to stay engaged. So I've kind of tried to take some of those lessons from the trail to apply to normal life.
No, I think you're spot on, brother. And I love it. I love the humility of it all. I love the fact that you broke down some of those those stigmas about not asking for help. Like, you needed help. You couldn't have done that trail by yourself. You needed your brother. You needed those other people. I think sometimes we try to do this by ourselves because we don't want to be a burden to anybody else, but we need that. And all four of you needed to finish that together for some reason. And I think that that's a beautiful thing, that you allowed them into your journey just as much as they allowed you into theirs. And I think that's what makes, the Phoenix and Addict to Athlete and all those other groups so overwhelmingly powerful. Is it's the people inside of each of those organizations, as all of us literally are all on the same team. Our goal here is to help and inspire and lead people out of the darkness of addictions. That's why I love talking to guys like you, Stewart, about like the multi dimensions of what's available out there, so long as you'll invest your heart into it. And I love that, man. Time goes by way too fast, and there's 1,000 more things. And since you're just down the street, we're going to come hang out this winter and come bike with you down there. Tell the listeners how to find the Phoenix, because I think it's a beautiful organization. I have nothing but respect for them. How do they find the Phoenix? What's the best way to get connected with them?
Yeah, so the best way is to just go to the website, thephoenix.org. From there, you can learn about the different events that are happening in your community. And we also have live streaming and on-demand content that you can find there on the website. And there will also be a link to download the mobile app. And that's where you can have a great resource with you in your pocket to find out what's going on in the area, where and how you can connect with other folks in the recovery community. And like I said, it's open to everyone. You don't have to be in recovery. We just ask that you're 48 hours sober. But Blu, I also wanted to give a shout out to you and Marissa and Addict to Athlete and all the great stuff that you're doing. When I didn't finish the loop on the end of my trail, I felt like at the end of my trail, I should probably start living a productive life again and make some career decisions and maybe not live out of a tent for the next couple of years, though I would have loved it, but I don't think it would have been affordable. So instead of being homeless, I decided to go out to eastern Utah, out to Vernal. And as soon as I got there, again, I know it's so important for me to stay connected, and I can easily slip into my reclusive way of being. It's kind of my default unless I take action on it. So got out there to Vernal. I was like, okay, let's find out what kind of cool, sober, active stuff there is going on here. One of the first results I found was Addict to Athlete. I was like, okay. And I saw they had a Uinta Basin chapter. I was like, okay, now we're talking. And I think they got these meetings down in Orem. I think a day later, I was on the road making the 3.5-hour drive down to Orem to meet you and Marissa and go to one of the meetings. I was like, what is this all about? And how can I get involved? And I knew Vernal was going to be a kind of a short time location. So decided I could probably be of the best use by running some workouts out there in Vernal, and so did that. So I just appreciate all the wonderful things that you're doing as well. It's so great to see this community of folks that are working together to connect people with meaningful activities and wonderful programs, recovery programs like the Erase and Replace. So just can't thank you guys enough for being one of those tools that I was able to, and still am able to access as part of my recovery journey.
Absolutely. Like you said, there's a lot of different roads to recovery. You don't need to pick one. I would definitely advocate the multifaceted approach. But Stewart, man, always a pleasure, brother. Like I said, we will be down there. In fact, we have one of our guys who's walking across the country right now. He'll be popping into Las Vegas here in a few days. And so we'll make sure that you guys get connected. He's advocating for recovery, mental health. And so, there's going to be some time for us to go down there and pedal, because like when it's snowing up here, man, I got to get somewhere where it's a little warmer. So come down and hang out with you.
Come on down. Absolutely. Would love to see y'all.
Awesome. Well, athletes and listeners, you've been well fed. Please, keep this podcast for anyone that might be struggling. And some of the things that Stewart's talked about, like ask questions. Like you said, there's a lot of times we fly under the radar. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions and to invest in a loved one to see what might be behind that mask they're wearing. So keep this podcast, share it with those who might be struggling, or maybe that you have some thoughts about this might be able to help. And again, stay tuned to the website, addicttoathlete.org. And athletes, do your best to keep your sobriety at the forefront of your mind. Every step forward is one in recovery, and to turn your mess into your message.